everybody, it's Abby Glassenberg from Craft Industry Alliance. Hope you're having a fabulous Wednesday. Today we are here to do our member spotlight, which we do every single Wednesday around this time. And today we're going to be talking with Jocelyn Sparkles, and Jocelyn runs a business that's focused on sewing and making costumes for the theater and upcycling. So very excited to be talking with her. And Jocelyn, if any of you are coming to H&H Americas next week, I'm excited to see you in Chicago. Please come by our booth and say hello. We have some fun free gifts for you. So, hey Jocelyn, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you doing?
Very nice to meet you. I'm doing really well. So I would love to learn a little bit about you and about your business. I understand that you do a lot of sewing for the theater.
I do. I'm a IATSE union member. I do a lot of shows. I dress a lot of shows, but I'm also a stitcher. So that's what has been the most helpful in getting me as far in that local.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you know about what makes for an effective costume for the stage and sort of what goes into creating that maybe the rest of the world doesn't realize or understand.
The number one thing is that Broadway costumes have to be wearable for 8 shows a week, which is a lot more than we do as our clothes. Once upon a time when I was in college, I took a textile class and learned that most of the clothing that is sewn in the United States is tested up to 50 wears. So that's the supposed to be the average life cycle of your clothing that you would buy.
Okay.
Right? And that's based on how the fabric itself is made, not necessarily a construction issue. And I'm sure you have noticed that, like denim, an example, has gotten thinner and thinner and thinner over time. So we might not get 50 uses out of it today, but that's the target. That's what it's supposed to live up
Right.
to.
And those 50 wears are probably also spread out maybe over a few seasons. Like maybe you're wearing the sweater once a week, once every other week or something like that. And so you might have this sweater for a few years because you're going to be spreading your 50 wears if that's really what it's going to be.
Or like a suit jacket.
Right.
You might wear that 3 times a year. You might have it for a decade and it still looks the same.
Right.
So most Broadway costumes, that has to be taken into consideration, the fabric of it. And I have worked a lot of shows recently, not necessarily Broadway shows, but more like local shows, where people have gotten off Amazon and then are surprised that they don't even hold up for the weekend of shows.
Wow.
It's like, well, that's meant to be cute for the day or whatever, but it's not meant to do the theatrics that actors require on stage.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like the fabrics beyond the construction of the garments and how the seams are sewn and the buttons are put in, etc. Actually, the fabric itself has to be sturdy enough to hold up over the course of the run of the show.
As well as if another actor needs to take that place, there has to be extra seam allowance in it to let it out, to make it fit a variety of people. And that is the thing that people don't expect the most, is that for a Broadway show, you probably don't have it turning over all the time. But for a smaller show or like a Disney on Ice type thing, you might need to refit it. Like if a bigger or smaller cast member needs to go into it.
Right, because there's one costume for, each role, and seemingly, multiple actors might be in that costume throughout the run of the whole show.
Exactly.
Especially shows that are long running. Right.
Exactly.
And so you're building it in a way where it's adjustable to a degree.
Yes. Most notably, what you would see versus with a custom costume over something you would get off the rack would be the extra large seam allowance. So there's going to be like an inch in the sides. There's going to be like an inch or 2 in the back, so that you have up to, say, 8 inches. You could make it bigger.
Wow. Okay. What about like exaggerated color, exaggerated lines, exaggerated collars, skirts, etc. I'm just thinking of like stage makeup, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, but like, you know, stage makeup is exaggerated, whereas you're sitting 50 rows back in the theater, but you can still see what the person's face looks like, and that makeup is really helping. Whereas if you got up close to them, you'd be like, wow, that's like way too much makeup. But from a distance, that's what you need to have. So do you take that sort of thing into account when you're sort of coming up with the costume ideas or making the costumes, as far as like, you know, what is going to look good in a dark, you know, theater from many feet back?
For me, I don't like to mix the same color on stage. I've always found it difficult for someone to have, like, say, black pants and a black shirt on stage, because under theatrical light, they're going to look different. Unless it's the exact same fabric. One's going to probably read green and one's going to read navy. And it's never going to be what you see in front of you without stage light. And I realized that back when I was in graduate school, we had made this beautiful emerald green cape. And when it got on stage, it looked like chartreuse. And I wasn't the designer, I had just helped make it, but I was surprised that nobody had thought about that, had asked to see what it would look like under stage light, because it was such a particular element of the show. And so by the time we got into rehearsal, there wasn't really, you couldn't build a new one. You had to sort of actually ask the lighting designer if he could tweak it in a way that would make it read more true.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good things to keep in mind for sure. So, how did you get interested in doing this line of work?
Honestly, when I was in college, sewing was the first thing I was good at. I just understood it in a way that others didn't. It made sense to me how it would look flat in a pattern situation versus how it would look on the body. And then when I moved to New York after college, I'm from Indiana. I moved to New York after college, and I interviewed with probably 75 fashion designers. And I got to the point where I thought people just wanted to see what someone from Indiana looked like. Right? And because I knew how to sew, I started reaching out to costume houses. And my first job in New York was at a place called Martin Esquerdo, and he did a lot of very fanciful costumes. And so one of the main projects he would work on, this was in the early aughts, was the Victoria's Secret angel wings. So that sort of like crazy sort of costume. And I'd go in, and it was like the waiting room was a sort of dark area, but then they had these two huge turtle tanks, and almost everybody there had a small dog. And it was the most welcoming thing I had ever walked into. And me and the draper got along really well, and we are still actually really good friends. And whenever I have a question, I still to this day can reach out to him and be like, what's the best way that you would do X, Y, or Z? And at the beginning of, like, in February, I got on the NBA All-Star game, which was in Indianapolis. We altered clothes and stuff for the NBA. And he was the one who was like, hey, I saw this ad, apply for this job. And so it's just always, and because I know how to sew, I just keep getting further and further into it, you know. And I feel like it's all small business owners. We think of like, what if I can't do it next month? What am I going to do instead? And it's just always, it's just never been that way. Like I've never had to figure out what's next.
So, what are some of the coolest things that you've made over the course of doing this that you would, like to share?
Well, one of the first things I made when I got to Parsons Mears in New York was this Lion King costume. And this was probably in '07. And it was a super complicated costume. And it was one of those costumes that's on for maybe 10 seconds, right? But as someone who's building the costume, you don't know that because I hadn't seen the show. And when I worked the show in 2012 in New Orleans, that costume was still on the road, right? And so it was interesting to be like, yes, that's what happens when you put knowledge and expertise into making a costume. It can last you, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And then my other major thing was when I was in New Orleans, I was making high-end Mardi Gras royalty costumes, and there's a ton of crews in New Orleans. I think there's something like 278 crews, and every crew has a king and a queen and a court, if you will. And I was working with the crew of Contraband, and I made 8 giant dresses and the queen's dress out of my apartment.
Wow.
And that was probably and they were all themed off of things from New York, because my designer was from New York. We had met in grad school, and I had hired her for this project. And so we had one that was the Rockefeller Center, and we had one that was Central Park, and it was, and still is, like this crazy thing to look back on and be like, I made all of that.
Yeah, that's very cool. I would love to see pictures. That's super cool. Okay, so I understand that during the pandemic, things had to change for you because primarily you are or were sewing for live in-person events of different sorts.
Right.
And obviously all of that was canceled. Nobody knew what the future was going to hold, how long it was going to be, etc. And so what did you do to sort of pivot during that time period?
So my first thought was, what do I have access to? I had tried to apply for other jobs, and I was not having any luck. So I had bought an embroidery machine, oddly enough, like a used embroidery machine, right before the pandemic, and hadn't really had time to like check it out. And I saw somebody online that was making these freestanding lace earrings, and basically it's an embroidery process in which they make their own fabric, so there's like nothing holding them together.
Yes, we had someone who does freestanding lace earrings on
Yesterday, last week,
and I learned about it. Yeah.
And so I started with that, but then I also did a lot of upcycling. I'm someone who's primarily always, for the most part, shopped at Goodwill for a lot of reasons. Someone who knows what it takes to sew a garment. I don't believe in fast fashion. I try not to use my money to support things that I don't agree with.
Right.
But also, as someone who's, I refer to myself as fun size. As someone who's fun size, I always have to alter clothes anyways. And so I'm not going to pay full price for something and then have to put my human labor in it to make it fit me. And so I already had like jeans that I had grown out of and whatever. And so I started just like adding extra fabric to the bottom of them. And so I did a lot of clothing. I do a lot of upcycled tie-dye, like the denim jacket or the dress that I'm wearing. I made a lot of hats out of like the legs of the skirts. So I would cut jeans off, I'd make them skirts, and I have all these legs. Like, what am I going to do with them? So I made a lot of hats. I've made a lot of like animals. I started making like memory animals for people. And so they would give me like their dad's shirt or whatever, and I would make it. And I have this one client who buys a teddy bear every time one of her people has a grandchild. So
Cute.
Right. So yeah, I just started with what I had in my apartment.
Right.
And I really like to create. I really like to keep stuff out of the landfill because we don't have any more land. So that's really important to me. And like I said, like the anti-fast fashion or slow fashion movement, as someone who sews and knows how difficult it is to make things.
Right. And I think people assume that a garment that's made in a factory is truly made by like an automated process. Right. But in fact, although there are some aspects of that that might be true, actually a human being has to sit and sew that garment. Like, I think that that's the piece that's invisible to us. And there's a lot of assumptions about how it gets made, but that like those sorts of steps are actually done by a person.
Exactly.
So, and I agree with you that once you understand what goes into it, it's very difficult to buy something that you're then gonna just throw away. So yeah, that's great. So I mean, it's also awesome that you had so many skills at your fingertips that when life got tough and, the pandemic hit and there was so much uncertainty, you were able to sort of look at what you knew how to do and the materials that you did have on hand and figure out a new path, whether temporary or permanent. But I think that really speaks to like a certain level of grit and ingenuity to be able to say like, well, I know what I can do and I don't necessarily need to wait to get a job. I can figure out a way to put my skills to work.
Exactly.
Yeah, super cool. All right, Jocelyn, where can people find you and follow along with all the creative output that you are putting out into the world?
So I'm Indy Craftivist on all social media. I'm on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, obviously. I'm trying my hand at Threads. I'm not really sure about that yet. And then I have a website, indycraftivist.com. But then this next month, May, it's a big racing town in Indy, and it's a big racing thing. So I'm going to be part of the Speedway Artist Collective that will be in downtown Speedway for the month of May.
Wow.
So, and I've tried to like make I got these racing stripes. It's just like a 6-inch piece of fabric from one of those jackets we did. And so I tried to make some earrings. I'm going to try to make some bags, some little things that are race inspired.
Yeah, that's going to sell really well because the thing is that a person who's coming to that, they want like a memento from the event that's going to be special, handmade, remind them of the time that they were there. And so, I mean, I don't see how that can do super well. So that's brilliant. Well, good luck with all of that. Thank you for being a member and thank you for coming on and doing our member spotlight this week.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.